Welcome to BoxTheBase, your home for boxing and baseball. And today we have a jam-packed episode of boxing. At the time of recording this, I just finished watching the grand arrivals for the last Crescendo taking place in Saudi Arabia on Saturday. And that's going to be an amazingly stacked card. I cannot wait for that fight, that whole card to take place. But before we can get into that, let's talk about what took place last Friday. Keyshawn Davis winning his first world title, and honestly, I'm super excited about that because I've been pretty high on Keyshawn Davis myself. But before we get into that fight and dissect it and analyze it, let's talk about some of the undercards that I thought were pretty good. Starting with Jared Anderson. I thought he was honestly very disappointing. I understand in his last fight he got brutally knocked out by Martin Bracoli. And honestly, I was excited to see that he was coming back finally after a little bit of a layoff and just get back in the ring and see what he had to offer. But honestly, it seems like he's mentally checked out. I mean, you guys let me know what you think of his performance in the comments below. But honestly, Jared Anderson looked mentally checked out. A lot of what his team was telling him in the corner, he just simply did not want to do. They were telling him to go to the body, and he was complaining about not wanting to hit elbows. And they were telling him what to do, how to throw his body shot so he lands them and not hit the elbows. He just simply seemed like he didn't want to be there. He kept saying he didn't want to go 10 rounds. I believe the fight was 10 rounds. And his team kept telling him, attack the body. Get this guy out of there. Hurt him to the body. You know, things that just you have to do if you want to knock out your opponent and not go the distance. And he simply just didn't listen to his corner. Wasn't in this fight at all. It just seemed like it was checked out. I mean, mentally, he was checked out. I have a feeling they probably had to force him every day to go and train because he just seemed so checked out of it. Aside from that, we had Abdullah Mason, who won by knockout, clean victory. I mean, nothing more to say there. I'm just excited to see where he progresses and where he goes from here. We also had Xander Zaya, who I thought was pretty good and showed out pretty well. He had an interesting fight against a tough opponent, and I mean, it was a little bit of a test just because the opponent was physically tough, you know. But in the end, he still won. So that was pretty good. And now we're getting down to the main event, which was Keyshawn Davis versus Denis Berinchyk. And honestly, from the first minute of the first round, it was not a competitive fight at all. It really didn't seem like Berinchyk had a game plan for Keyshawn Davis. He just kept rushing in at him. It felt like he wanted to wrestle him all night, and he really wasn't throwing any punches. And it was honestly what I thought was going to be a competitive fight ended up being a bit of a disappointing fight in terms of Berinchyk being the champion, and he looked like one of the worst champions I have ever seen in my lifetime. I don't think there's ever been a champion this bad. How he won the title from Navarrete is really beyond me because there is just no explanation for it. Keyshawn, once he was able to take Berinchyk off of him and stop him from clinching so much, he found the jab and he was able to land a body shot in that fourth round and knock him down, and that put an end to the fight. And Keyshawn Davis became world champion. I mean, even Keyshawn's trainer, Womack, was saying after the fight that Berinchyk was simply just trash. And I have to agree. I mean, Berinchyk brought nothing to the table that gave problems to Keyshawn at all. I was not impressed by Berinchyk. I don't think many on social media, as I looked on Twitter and stuff, I don't think many people were impressed by Berinchyk at all. And honestly, he's one of the worst champions I've ever seen in my lifetime. Congrats to Keyshawn for winning the world title. And now we have to take a look at what's possibly next for Keyshawn Davis. Because this division of 135 is pretty interesting. You have Gervonta Tank Davis, who is the biggest name in that division, in my opinion. You have Shakur Stevenson, and you have Lomachenko. A few other names that are maybe in that division or around that division that could possibly fight Keyshawn are Andy Cruz and Teofimo Lopez. Now, the one fight to see would be Gervonta Tank Davis. That would be the fight to make with Keyshawn. Two big stars in the U.S., it could be a mega fight in the U.S. It would be one of the bigger fights that could take place in the U.S. in the summertime. But with some of Gervonta Tank Davis's recent comments, I'm not sure how likely it is because it really does seem like he doesn't want to be boxing that much longer. Like the retirement talks wasn't just all talk. but he seems serious about it. So let me know what you guys think of Keyshawn versus Tank Davis. How you think that fight would go if it got made. I think it would be a fantastic fight. The biggest test for Keyshawn in his career would be Tank, and it would just be a really good fight for Tank to put on his resume. Outside of that, you also have a fight versus Lomachenko. That would be interesting if Lomachenko stops messing around, because there's been talk about him possibly retiring. He recently just turned 37 not that long ago. I think it was a few days ago. So I don't know. They keep giving him extensions on his belt, which I think needs to stop. He either gets in there and fights, or he just retires. But he needs to get in there. They need to pressure him to actually fight, because it would be really good if he fought Keyshawn Davis and we got that fight. I mean, I don't know. I don't know where Lomachenko's head is at. I don't know what he's going to do. But I would like to see Lomachenko versus either Tank Davis or Lomachenko. Now, for the Shakur Stevenson fight, it's not happening. Shakur Stevenson and Keyshawn Davis simply just have too strong of a brother bond, so they're not going to get in the ring together. It's just not going to ever happen between them. I don't see it ever happening. That's off the table. No matter how you slice it, it's never happening. Now, Teofimo Lopez would be an interesting fight because it already has a bit of drama, because he, I think, is the main culprit for sending the watermelon and bananas. I don't know if you saw that Keyshawn received right before fighting Baranchik, and Baranchik got framed for it. I think that's a pretty interesting fight, just because Teofimo is already building that drama, and why not? You know, it would be a really good fight to see happen. And I think a lot of people would be rooting for Keyshawn in that fight, because Teofimo right now is not the most likable guy in boxing. Now, as far as a fight with Andy Cruz, they have history. Now, they don't have professional history, but they have history from the amateurs, where I believe Andy Cruz beat him. I don't know more than once, but at least once. So that'd be a pretty good fight to see happen. And as far as in the pros, they haven't met. Andy Cruz wants that fight. I think it's a fight that Keyshawn should give him, and Andy Cruz would just be an interesting fight because of their amateur history. I mean, do I think it'd be a little too early for Andy Cruz? Maybe. He's not even had double-digit fights, I believe, in as a pro. So I think it's going to take time to build up, but I hope in the future they meet in the ring for sure. I mean, you guys let me know in the comments below who you would like to see Keyshawn Davis fight next, because honestly, I think he has one of the brightest futures. And if Tank really does retire at the end of 2025, I think he becomes the biggest star in the U.S. market for boxing, because he has amazing hype already, and it's only going to keep growing. The bigger and bigger he becomes, and the better the fights that he takes on. Hopefully, he ends up with one of these big fights this year, because I think he wants to fight a few more times this year. He wants to be active, so that's a really good thing for him. But we'll see who he gets to fight in those fights. Hopefully, they're actually good matchups and not just one-sided beatdowns like most of his fights have been up to this point. And moving on to the last Crescendo taking place this Saturday, I'm honestly just really, really excited for this card. Top to bottom, it is one of the most stacked cards I've ever seen in my lifetime, and I simply just cannot wait for it to happen. So we're going to take a look at all the fights on this card, but I want to talk about today's grand arrival, because every fighter showed up that's going to be on the main card except for one, and that would be Floyd Schofield. And honestly, I just don't understand it. He missed one of the press conferences earlier that they did for this, promoting this fight, and now he missed the grand arrivals. I understand that some people have said, oh, he's just training, he's just being busy, he's not focused on all his media stuff. But honestly, I think he needs to get in the ring and simply just, not in the ring, but show up to these media events. I mean, every other fighter is showing up. He can't be the only one not showing up. All these other guys are fighting. All these other guys are taking their training seriously, and they're getting in there and doing all the media stuff. He needs to be part of the media stuff. because it's no excuse for him to be missing media stuff. Because what, he's trying to play some mind games. I mean, the Schofield, honestly, for this fight are moving really, really weird because they've accused Shakur of a lot of things that I don't think are really true. Like if they're scared or worried. You wanted this fight. You called out Shakur Stevenson. He only took the fight because you kept calling him out so much, and you were the only guy who really wanted to fight him. So stop acting scared. Show up to the media stuff. Stop playing around and get in there and have a fight with Shakur Stevenson. I'm not worried about him actually showing up to the fight because I know he will. This is me coming to you guys after having recorded my full episode because news broke that Kid Austin, aka Floyd Schofield, pulled out of the fight. And honestly, I think it's BS. Apparently, he's in the hospital sick. I don't know how true that is, but I honestly think that he's just ducking and he's scared because he didn't show up to one of the press conferences. He didn't show up to the grand arrival. And I think it's just utter BS that he's not in this fight. And now Shakur Stevenson is going to have to be fighting Josh Padley. Let me know what you guys think. We can return to the full video now. But just stop playing all these little games and show up to your media workouts. Because every other fighter is doing it, you have no excuse. So, taking a look at all these cards that are taking place on the card, we'll start with the first one, which is Callum Smith versus Joshua Buatsi. I personally would like to see Callum Smith have a bounce back win and come back and win and keep himself, in the top of this light heavyweight division. But honestly, if I'm going to be honest with you guys, I see him winning and rising his stock. I'm pretty sure he's an English fighter, but it'll be interesting to see where he goes from here if he's able to beat Callum Smith. Next up, we have Zhang, the Chinese fighter, versus Kabali, I think is how you say the other guy's name. I'm personally going to pick Zhang. He's not all that fast. He's not all that explosive in terms of movement in the ring, but he has really heavy hands, and I think he's going to beat him up with just simply too much power for him. After that, we have Virgil Ortiz versus Israel Madrimov, which is probably the most even fight on this card. You have Virgil Ortiz, who's coming off of a win versus Boachuk, who some people thought he lost that fight. And then you have Madrimov, who's coming off of a loss versus Crawford, who honestly, a lot of people, including myself, thought he gave Crawford a really tough fight. Now, I still think Crawford won that fight, and the decision was correct. But Madrimov really proved himself that he's a good fighter, and that he is actually could be a tough fighter in this 145-pound division. And Virgil Ortiz should not be taking him lightly, and I don't think he will be taking him lightly because it's going to be a tough fight. Madrimov is very awkward in there, is the way I would describe him. And Ortiz, I mean, he's a good fighter. I don't know if he lost versus Boachuk. That's a very tough fight that I'd have to go back and rescore again and take a look at again. But honestly, I mean, Boachuk gave him a tough fight, and Ortiz just should not be overlooking Madrimov. It's going to be, I think, 50-50. I have Ortiz winning personally, but I would not be surprised if Madrimov comes out there and pulls off the win. Because honestly, it's a very close fight for both of these guys. Next up, we have Carlos Adames versus Hamza Shiraz. Personally, I'm picking Shiraz to win, but I think Adams is the favorite for this fight. I'll be honest, I don't know a lot about both of these guys. I haven't seen a ton of them, but I mean, Adams just seems like a really, really interesting fighter who's coming in here to prove himself against a tough fighter. I mean, it seems like a lot of people don't want to fight him, and Shiraz would be pulling off, I guess, an upset because Adams is the favorite. So let me know in the comments what you guys think about that fight if you know more about these two fighters, because I've seen them fight a little bit here and there, but not enough. And then we have Shakur Stevenson versus Floyd Schofield, which I think is probably the most one-sided fight on this card. If Schofield were to win, I would honestly be super shocked. I just don't see him winning at all. I think Shakur is going to school him, potentially stop him, but at least it's going to be a landslide unanimous decision win. There is no reason for this to be a close fight. Schofield wanted this fight. So honestly, I'm not taking anything away from Stevenson taking this fight because Schofield wanted it. He was in there on Twitter calling out Shakur Stevenson and he wanted the fight and Shakur gave him the fight. I think there's no reason to, criticize Shakur for fighting someone like Floyd Schofield. Now, like I was saying earlier, I don't like how Schofield has been missing some of the media workouts and media press conferences. But honestly, I think this should be an easy win for Shakur Stevenson. But if Schofield wins, we have to give him the credit because I am very biased towards Shakur Stevenson. He is my current favorite fighter right now in boxing. But honestly, I would not take anything away from Schofield if he won. But that being said, I think it's going to be a landslide win for Shakur Stevenson, and he's taking Floyd Schofield to school. Then after that, we have Daniel Dubois versus Joseph Parker, which is another great one where Dubois is going to be the favorite after knocking out Anthony Joshua in his last fight. But I think a lot of people are kind of overlooking Joseph Parker. I don't think it's going to be as easy of a win as Dubois got versus AJ. I don't know if he's going to knock him out. He has the power to knock out Parker, but if Parker comes in ready to box, he can move around that ring. He doesn't have the power to necessarily, I think, hurt Dubois. So if he wins, it would probably be either a split decision or it would just simply be a decision win if Parker were to win. But I honestly like Parker. I would like to see him win, but I personally think that Dubois would win. But it would be really awesome to see Parker win and upset this heavyweight division because I think there's already plans for what to do next for Daniel Dubois. But I think that if Parker wins, he upsets this division and the plans for Dubois moving forward. And then we get to the main event, which the first fight of Bivol versus Beterbiev was amazing. It was boxing at its finest. The technical boxing of Bivol versus the power punching of Beterbiev. And I mean, Beterbiev had a 100% knockout rate going into that fight. Bivol was the first one to take him the full 12 rounds. And honestly, I don't know if I would necessarily call it a robbery, but I do think that Bivol won, and I think they got the decision wrong. Does that constitute as a robbery? I guess so. But honestly, I think that from what I've seen of Bivol's training, he's training like if they stole something from him, and I'm honestly really excited to see how this rematch takes place because I think Bivol is going to come back and win back in blood, take it back in blood, because honestly, if you want to call it a robbery, then he was robbed in the first fight. I honestly thought he won, and I thought it was more or less convincingly. I'm not saying he won by a landslide per se, but I think the rounds that he won were convincingly enough to give him the decision, but ultimately the judges gave it to Beterbiev. However, we do not need to count out Beterbiev. He is still one of the best light heavyweights in his division, and we cannot leave him out of this. He has the power to hurt Bivol, and I think he's going to come in there trying to pressure Bivol, trying to hurt him earlier than he did last time, and not leave it up to the judges, because I think this time around, Bivol is going to box his butt off, and he's going to box better than he did last time. And honestly, I think for Beterbiev, if he wants to win, he needs to bring the pressure to Bivol. That's what he needs to do. That's what needs to happen. And we'll see what takes place in this rematch. I fully have faith in Bivol. That is my pick for this fight. So you guys let me know in the comments below who you think wins each of these fights. I'm going to go through them again and just simply pick who I think wins each fight. Not necessarily who I want to win, but who I think wins these fights. And it's going to, starting off with Callum Smith versus Buatsi. I honestly see Buatsi winning, even though I would like to see Callum Smith win. I think Buatsi pulls this one out. For Zhang versus Kabali, I have Zhang winning. I think Zhang has too much power and potentially stops him. Next up, it's Ortiz versus Madrimov. I simply have Virgil Ortiz winning. It's going to be a very close fight. I think it's going to be a lot of back and forth, but I think Ortiz pulls it off and stays, I believe, undefeated. Then as for Carlos and Hansa Shiraz, I think Shiraz wins, pulling up potentially an upset. But in the end, I don't think it matters who wins that fight because I think they all lose to Janibek, the to Janibek in the future. And then next up, we have Shakur Stevenson versus Floyd Schofield, where I think Shakur Stevenson is going to win by a landslide. I think he could possibly stop him if he overwhelms him, if he gains the confidence to really pressure him in that ring. But honestly, I think the safe bet is to go Shakur Stevenson by unanimous decision. Then you have Daniel Dubois versus Joseph Parker, where I really would love to see Joseph Parker win, but I really think it's going to be Dubois who wins. I don't know by stoppage because Joseph Parker can move around the ring and he is really elusive and interesting movement in that ring. But honestly, I see Daniel Dubois winning. Next up, we have the main event rematch of Bivol versus Beterbiev, where I think Bivol is winning. I mean, if you've seen the way he's training, he's getting his back in blood. He is going to win. And I simply see him taking this fight because it feels like in the first one, he just got everything stolen from him and he's back to get it back in blood. He might try to get the stoppage, honestly, because I don't think he wants to leave it up to the judges again. So yeah, that'll wrap up this episode of Box the Base. Thank you all for tuning in. Make sure you subscribe down below and check out all my socials, Twitter, Instagram, TikTok. And let me know who you guys think wins in these next. And let me know who you guys think wins every fight of the last Crescendo card. And let me know who you guys would like to see Keyshawn Davis fight next. Thank you all for watching, and I'll catch you guys on the next one.